done this, none of us. And we may not like the buzzwords, new norm, but there's going to be a new norm. Things are going to be different. We can either choose, treat it like we're building and starting over and, dig in with both hands, or we can watch our freedoms and our religion and our Christianity shrivel up and blow away in the wind. It's as simple as that. But that decision will be made by men like ourselves. We will choose to do it or it won't happen. We can easily, or at least those of us that are a little bit older, we can look at different churches across this country and see what happens when we lose our men. I go to enough churches in a year, about 170 services, and they're greatly filled with women. Women stayed faithful to some extent, and the men did not. And we can read it in the temperature of our churches.
Amen.
We can see it. We can see it in our homes. We can see it in our communities. The men have quit. And if anyone's going to rebuild, nothing to do with the COVID. If anyone is going to rebuild our Christianity as we know it, it's going to start with us.
Amen.
And as I've spent those, last several years traveling around and watching, because somewhat you kind of get in your bubble and you think, well, maybe it's just here. Can I tell you that the overall temperature, pre-COVID, pre-any of this, was poor all across this country in our church. I'm not telling you that we're just doing it wrong or that we're failures, but I'm telling you that when we want to talk about the goodness of God, the bigness of God, and we have to start with things like, I heard a story, I read a book, because it's been too long since anyone in our generations, and there's multiple generations, can say, I was there the day that I saw God move big.
Amen.
Yes,
You can't say that anymore. And I started wondering, why can't we say that anymore? Has God changed? Is God different? My Bible said he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if God didn't change and we're not seeing him move, who changed? We did. We backed up. We moved. We changed. And the reason that we're not seeing God move is because I think that we've become content to live in the wilderness instead of go find promise. We've become content with what we want to call blessings that are nothing more than crumbs and scraps from the table.
Amen.
God has big plans. God has big purposes, but we have to be willing. So for just a minute this morning, we're going to go all the way back to Genesis. If you got your phones, if you got a Bible, we're going to look at some of the original promises. I understand we are not the children of Israel. I do not believe in any substitution theology. God's children are God's children. But I think the principles apply to us. We are modern day Christians. We are grafted into the vine. And the same promises that were made to them have been made to us. Before we go any further, though, we need to ask the Lord for some help. Lord, I want to thank you again, God, just for the privilege of being out here this weekend. Lord, I thank you for these men that have come out, that have stayed out, that have come back this morning. God, I thank you for what you did for us last night. I thank you for being real and present amongst us. I thank you for the men that you spoke to, that you whispered into their hearts. But Lord, that was yesterday. God, I'm so tired of living on yesterday. God, I'm asking that you would give us a burden that deep down inside you would plant a yearning, a fire. Not that we would grow, not that we would be greater, not that we would be seen, but that God, one more time, we can see you do what only you can do. That God, you would show yourself great and mighty, high and holy and lifted up. And God, that you would allow us the privilege of being part of it. God, I'm asking in these next few minutes that you would clear my mind of the distractions, that you would recall the things that you would have me to say. God, I'm asking more than that you will speak to these men, that they can look back and say, I remember the moment when God built the fire. And Lord, I will praise you and give you thanks in advance for what I know you're going to do. In your precious name, amen.
Amen.
What do I mean when I say we are content to live in the wilderness? We all know the wilderness reference is Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt under God's promise, and they were headed for a promised land. And it took them 40 years. 40 years to get there. Do you know that your Bible says that journey should have taken 11 weeks? That's how close they were. They were 11 weeks journey away from where God wanted them. And it took them 40 years. Why? Because God changed the plan? Or God got confused? No, because man got content where he was. Man got out in the wilderness and got content with where he was. And this 40 years that should have been less than 2 weeks drug on and on through generations because man wanted it his way. You say, yeah, but that's then. We're past that now. We've got freedoms, we've got religion, we've got all this stuff as churches, we've got money in the bank, we've got missionaries on the field, we've got things that we do. How much better we are. And yet I look at that and say how much more comfortable we are.
Amen.
We may not be in the wilderness, but we're still wandering. We're still lost. We're still plodding along, looking for what it is we have. Yes, we have a free country for now. We have freedom of religion for now. There's a lot of places right now this weekend that could not do what we're doing here.
Amen.
They could not gather up and open a Bible and see what it has to say because they're not allowed to. You say, oh, that used to be. That was before the Iron Curtain, blah, blah. No, that's today.
Amen.
There's places where we can't worship because we're not allowed. You don't believe that? I'll run you over to Elgin, Illinois, introduce you to a guy over there by the name of Tim Spitzbergen. And they came and said, we're going to put you in jail if you don't close your church. 5 weeks ago. Right here in America. Our freedoms are only our freedoms for as long as we embrace it.
Amen.
Until we become comfortable. We become complacent. We decide that we're happy where we're at. See, used to be, I can go back in my Bible and I can show you men of God, I can show you prophets, that when things were going astray from where God wanted them, they went to the kings and they stuck their fingers in their faces. And they said, you're not right with God, and you can fix it or he's going to judge you. Been a long time since we've seen that.
Amen.
Been a long time since we've seen anybody call sin, sin. It's not been that many years that it was a common thing for the sitting U.S. president to call some key pastors all across this country and say, I've got some things this week going on. Maybe there's national issues, maybe there's personal issues, but I need you to pray. Sitting U.S. pastors calling, or presidents calling pastors, asking for prayer. I love Donald Trump. I think he's doing a great job. But I don't think he made too many phone calls this week to send his prayer.
Amen.
That's not his fault. That's our fault. He's not calling because he's not seeing the hand of God move the way that we used to see the hand of God move. He's not calling, and it's our fault. So what happened? Where did we lose it? Where did we drop the ball? If I needed to give you examples, you say, what is this God moving big? There was a man by the name of George Mueller. But for me to tell you about George Mueller, I got to go all the way back to the 1800s. George Mueller read a verse one day in the Bible. I'm going to read it to you. Psalms 81:10 says, open thy mouth wide, and I will fill it. And when George read that verse, he took it literally. And he said, there's people out there, there's children out there that are in need, and if I can get them to God, God will fill them. So George did this really cool thing. He went out and he bought a piece of property. This piece of property was called Ashley Downs. On this piece of property, he built what they call houses. And he started putting kids in them, taking care of kids. He built 5 of these houses. And I laugh when I say the word houses because each house could hold 400 children. He ran this property for 24 years. At any given time, he could house, if you do the math, 2,000 kids. In 24 years, you're probably looking at, I don't know, what, 100,000 kids that went through his property? While he had them, never one time did he go to a bank and take out a loan. Never one time did he go find personal investors and get their money. In fact, he was known for a statement. He said, "My primary objective is not the welfare of the children. My main concern is that it should be seen that God is providing all of the needs as a result of prayer and faith without anyone being asked or approached." He said anyone can raise money, but only a few can silently pray it in. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that in decades. See, he served a big God, and he had a big vision for what that God could do, and then he lived it. And for 24 years, he took care of thousands and thousands of children. Why? Because he was special, he was different than us. Yeah, in that he knew how to get a hold of God. He believed in the God that he served. There was another man by the name of Charles Finney. We know Charles Finney as an evangelist. At the time they called him a revivalist. Charles Finney traveled from place to place and would just come into town and start preaching. He didn't carry a tent. He didn't have a group of churches that would bring him in. He would just come into town and start preaching and see who gathered up. He was in New York looking for a place that he could hold meeting. And he went into a cotton mill. Biggest building he could find in town. He went in and he went to go see the manager so that he could ask him if he could hold meeting in this place. And the story is told, and I've looked it up and confirmed it 3 or 4 times. There's newspaper articles that before he could get from the entrance to the cotton mill to the manager's office, there were men laying in the floor, crying, begging God to save them. He never spoke. He never introduced himself. He never said what it was he was there for. You say, how could that happen? You see, the week before, George had been out in the woods, praying, fasting, begging God. He had met with the Father. He had met with the Spirit. Just because George left the woods, you don't think they left him, right? And when he got to that mill, the Father and the Son and the Spirit were still with him.
Amen.
And them men were laying in the floor not because of who George was. They were laying in the floor weeping and crying because the true conviction of the Holy Spirit fell on that building.
Amen.
But I got to go back to the 1800s to tell you them stories. Been a long time since we can talk about 3,000 people getting saved, which is what happened in the weeks following George walking into that mill. 3,000 people got saved because Charles Finney decided to get in the woods and find God and do something about it. Why do we have to go that far back? I'm not going to keep you but a minute. We've all got things to do. But in Genesis chapter 28, we start reading a story about Jacob. Jacob, you know, is the brother of twins, Jacob and Esau. There was enmity and difficulty and odds and strife between them from the very beginning. Jacob lives a fairly sordid life. And by the time he finally leaves home because he had no choice, God meets with him in a place and God gives him a promise. And I want to read this to you. In Genesis 28:19 it says, "And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city was called Luz at first." Get this, verse 20. "And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house, then shall the Lord be my God." And I started to study that vow and think about what it meant. why he would pray that prayer, why he would ask for the things that he asked for. And as I began to look back at his life and put it in context, I've told you he left home because his brother wanted to kill him, because his father was angry with him. He left home alone with nothing. He didn't leave with a bunch of possessions and a bunch of money and a bunch of servants. He fled his home, the only place he had ever known, to get away from a man that wanted to kill him and a father that no longer wanted him, because he had been lying and stealing and doing all this terrible stuff. So now when I go back and I look at this verse, I'm going to read you the same verse, and I just want to insert what I'm going to tell you were his thoughts, my opinion. Jacob vowed a vow saying, if God will be with me and keep me, because I'm all alone, and protect me from my brother that wants to kill me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, because I have nothing, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house, who I'm not sure still loves me, then shall the Lord be my God. See, when Jacob made his vow to God, he had some real and specific needs. He had some very personal, deep problems that he needed some real help with. This wasn't something he was going to get out of a self-help book. This wasn't something somebody was going to just hold his hand and walk him through. There were people that wanted to kill him. He needed to see God move. And he went and he made a specific vow to God. As I started to think about that and look back over my life, I don't know about you guys, but I can point to a place where I made some promises, a place where I made some agreements, if you will. This might be the place where God saved you. It might be the day that you got saved. It might be sometime later, because those are not always related. Maybe it was a time when, like me, you were broken, you were lost and helpless, and you didn't know what to do. And you got alone with God, and you began to plead when words couldn't fill the things you needed to say. There's been times that I've laid in the floor for hours and cried because I didn't know the words, so that I could hear from him. Because I'm special? No, in those times, because it was so dark I couldn't find him. I wasn't even sure anymore if he was really there, and I needed to feel him. Those moments. My dad tells a story, and I won't drag it out. He grew up in a very rough time. By the time he was 10 or 11 years old, he'd hitchhike from Chicago to Memphis and never tell his family he was leaving. He'd call them a couple days later and say, oh, by the way, I'm in Tennessee at the grandparents' house. He'd hop a coal train and ride it to Tennessee. His idea, or I won't say his idea, his summer vacations were he'd sit in a one-room apartment with his father. Because his father would take his paycheck and he'd go buy all the booze he could buy. And for 1 week every year, my grandfather would sit in an apartment and drink himself till he passed out. And my dad's job as a 12-year-old boy was to make sure he didn't die. That was his summer vacation. His mother would take the other brother and leave and go see other family. And my 12-year-old father would stay with his grandfather to make sure that he didn't die. And he tells the story one night walking down the railroad tracks at 15 years old. It's probably 3 in the morning. He's been out and already in trouble that day. So much trouble that he's afraid to go home. And he don't know what else to do, and he don't know where else to go. This was not a man that was raised in Sunday school. This was a man that was raised in the streets of Chicago. And he said, I was walking down the tracks, honestly waiting for a train to come because maybe it would hit me. And he said, while I was walking, he said, I don't know why, but I just started talking to what must be God. And he said, Lord, I don't know why things are the way they are, and I don't even know if you're there. This was the statement he made. He said, God, if you'll take me, I'll take you. That was his moment. That was the moment. That not because he had a great Bible education, not because he had a great Christian heritage. It was the moment when God became real.
Amen.
And that he knew that the only way to get anything out of life was going to be to get what God had for him. And we've got Jacob, and he's in this place, this dark place. And he makes this vow. And God promises him all the things that he's going to do for him. In fact, in verse 22, Jacob builds this thing. It says, and this stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give a tenth back to you. He said, I'm going to build this monument. This monument here is going to remind me of the promise that I made to you and the promise that you made to me. This monument is here to signify what we've agreed on. In fact, he called it Bethel, and Bethel literally means the house of God. And he said, everything that you're going to give to me, I'm going to give it back to you because I just want to serve you. I just want to worship you. Now, I don't know about you, but I hope that at some point in your life, without having to call it out, that you can pick a moment and you say, I remember that. I remember when I made that deal, when I made that promise, when I made that commitment with God. And if you have that moment, I want you to hang on to it because in a minute we're going to talk about it. This moment where you realized it wasn't about you. It was just about him. I would think that that moment had to be Jacob's spiritual pinnacle in his life. That was the closest that he had ever been and maybe ever was going to be. And there's this great spiritual accomplishment. You think he's going to really do some great stuff. And in the very next verse in Genesis, it says, and then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. Say, what's so big about that? Well, the promise that God made said, this is the land I'm giving you. This is the spot that I have for you. Everything that I want for you is right here. And Jacob said, that's great. I'm going to vow my life to you, and you're going to take care of me. In the very next verse, Jacob said, oh, wait, I got some stuff I got to do. And Jacob traveled on his journey. Exactly the way that, unfortunately, we seem to do. Which is why when I want to talk about the bigness of God, I got to go back 150 years to tell you about the great things. Yes, I can point to some things that were clearly miraculous. The fact that I walked away from the car wreck that we talked about, that was nothing but God. I get that. But I'm talking about the true moving where the lost understand God did that. We've not seen that in generations. Because we, like Jacob, said, God, I'm going to make you a promise, and I'll be right back. And for the next 14 years, Jacob did what he did. He married, and then he married again, and then he had some kids, and then he built some land, and he got some cattle, and he just had life. There was no great sin in what he was doing. He wasn't running. He wasn't fleeing. He wasn't living some pagan, wicked life. He was just living. Building a family, having a job. But he wasn't where God told him to be. He wasn't doing what God had asked him to do, and he wasn't in the place where God said, this is the place. And for 14 years, he just continued and was content with the scraps instead of the blessing. He was content with where he was. Now I'm going to kind of run through this quick, but if you know the story of Jacob, you know that after these 14 years, he's going to leave. And his father-in-law comes to him and says, hey, me and you've been doing real good together. You know, you're working, I'm making money off you working, and we're all happy. Why don't you stay? And I started thinking about how many times in my life someone has come to me and said, you know, God's really kind of blessing both of us. Why don't you hang around here? Why don't you, well, I know you got the church thing on Sunday, but we'll pay you double time if you'll hang around. It's good for you. It's good for me.
Yeah.
Hey, I know you got those commitments, those things that you said you were going to take care of, but, extra money and extra work, that's a blessing from God, right? You should hang around. And pretty soon, it's years later, and we're wondering what happened.
Yes, sir.
Where we lost our burdens, where we lost our commitments at. And that's exactly where we find Jacob, except now instead of 14 years, now it's 20 years. And he's still working, and he's still building, and he's still getting, and he's still being blessed. It's not the blessings that God promised him.
Amen.
It's not what God said he was going to do for him. At the end of this 20 years, God tells him again, listen, I need you to go. In fact, the verse says, and the Lord said unto Jacob, return to the land of thy fathers, to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. No chastisement, no condemnation. Jacob, you're not where I want you. Go back and I'll be there. I'll be there and I'll take care of you. God's promises are always conditional. You know that, right?
Yeah.
That's very important. He said, come unto me and I will give you rest. Call upon me and I will answer thee. We do, he does. There's a condition. There's this union, this bond between us. And God said, come back. Go back where I told you to be. Go back to that place where you made the vow, the commitment to me. This is what I consider to be God's nudge. Where God came along and bumped him. He said, hey, you're not where I put you. You're not doing what I told you to do. I need you to come back. This is the same one that we talked about last night. And we're sitting in church and God comes by the pew and bumps us. And he says, hey, there's this stuff. And yet, we write it off. We write it off to a guilty conscience. Emotionalism, nostalgia. God's blessed me where I'm at. See, that's not really what he meant. And all the while, God's saying, you don't belong here. This isn't what I have for you. It's not wrong. It's not wicked. It's not some terrible life. But it's not what I intended for you to have. You need to move. And yet we're content to live in this place, this wilderness, where we don't have what we wanted. So Jacob agrees with God. He's going to leave. But you got to understand, in this 20 years that he's been living, building a family, hiding, his brother Esau still hates him. His brother Esau still wants him dead. And his brother Esau's been growing just like him. And he has servants and soldiers and cattle and people and property. And in order for Jacob to leave, he's got to pass through Esau's land, because now Esau owns everything around it. And now Jacob's worried. And the Bible tells me in Genesis 32 that as he leaves, it says, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of the place Mahanaim. He's leaving. He's worried about his brother. He steps out of where he's at, and there's two angels there. And actually, if you read the commentaries, the opinion is it's not actually two angels, it's two companies of angels. One before and one behind. He is fully protected. God said, I want you to go back to what I have for you, and I'm going to provide protection for you to get there. And did Jacob go, okay, I'm going? He said, all right, Lord, I'm going to leave, but I've got to go take care of my brother first. It says that he decided he needed to go meet with his brother. Because, see, Jacob still had his own ideas about what a blessing was. Jacob still had his own ideas about how things needed to be done. Now, I'm going to summarize for you. In chapter 32, Jacob leaves to meet his brother, and instead he meets with God physically. And he fights with God all night and gets some things straightened out. In Genesis chapter 33, Jacob and Esau get together, and lo and behold, just like God said, they made peace. But instead of Jacob pursuing what God said and going back where he's supposed to be, he decided to set up camp right there on his brother's land. Built a house, stayed right there, because, things are better now. I got what I wanted, my family's together. But it's not what God gave me. It's not what God wanted me to have. So Jacob stays. And Jacob builds this house, and he's content. I don't know about you, but when I read that story, you know what I hear? I hear in the dark Jacob going, I know it's not really what God asked for. It sounds pretty close. I am still in the land of Canaan. I'm just not where he told me to go. I'm kind of on the edge. It's all right. No, nobody's being hurt here. I know, God, that I'm supposed to be different, but, you know, if I hang around these other guys pretty soon, they're maybe going to see you in me, even though I look like them and not like you. Yeah, you know, maybe if I just stay for a while, then I'll go do what you want. Here's another one. I know that she's not mine, but God, you probably meant for us to be together anyway. And we laugh, except I've had men tell me that. I know that she's someone else's, but God really intended for me to have her. That's the way our messed up little male brain works.
Yes, amen.
And God said, no, what I have for you is over there. And you built the house here. And there's nothing wrong with the house, and there's nothing wrong with how you got it. But what I had for you is over there. And you need to go back over there. And we keep falling down. I'm running ahead. Chapter 34, unfortunately, we see the consequences of this action of Jacob. See, I told you over the last 20 years, Jacob's amassed family and things and stuff. And now he's worked stuff out with his brother, and he's built a house, and it's looking like he's being blessed. And in one of the neighboring cities, there's a prince. And the prince decides that he really likes Jacob's daughter. So he takes her. And when he takes her by force. And the Bible tells me that they rape her and they abuse her. Because Jacob decided it was okay to stay here. Even though it's not where God put him. Two of Jacob's sons decide that's not right. So they go into the city that the man is the prince of. And they kill every man in the city. And they go take their sister back. But now what I have is a daughter that's been raped and abused, and two sons that are mass murderers, and I have to flee again. Because I wasn't willing to go back where it is that I made the promise to God, and God said, go here. Because I was content to live with the false blessings instead of what was in the promised land. I was content to live with what I could do and what I could produce and what I could make. Does it kind of sound like the way we all live?
Amen.
I can get, I can do, I can advance, I can achieve.
Yes, sir.
And I'll get to what God wants later.
Yeah.
When I've got enough,